And welcome back to another episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. We're your hosts, Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. The Jets have officially wrapped on minicamp. We have 5 weeks until training camp. But Michael, plenty of stuff to discuss. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, and this has been a really eventful offseason. It hasn't really felt like there's been that much of a dead period. We've kind of had a lot to talk about consistently.
Yeah, this should be the most mellow time of the offseason. You never know with the Jets. They could make a few moves. And I guess that's a good place to start because Robert Saleh on his press conference on Friday had some interesting things to say about whether or not the Jets could add a veteran corner, a veteran quarterback. We know there's some news about Morgan Moses. So let's hop into how the Jets can improve their team over the next few weeks. Let's start with the cornerback. Saleh made it kind of sound like the Jets might roll with their young guys into the season, at least into training camp, and then maybe they'll reassess after preseason. How do you feel about that?
I think it's definitely a strategy that is, I feel like it's a high, for a team in this position, I think it's a strategy that makes sense. If you're a team that's trying to compete to win a championship, if you're in win now mode, then it's not really a strategy that I think makes a lot of sense. You want to improve your team as much as possible. Add guys who have a high floor, who you can rely on. But for a team like the Jets that is in transition, is in the first year of a new coaching staff, and is coming off of a 2-win season, you want to find out who your core guys are. You want to build your core, figure out who you can build around going forward. And I think that's an approach that they're employing at a lot of different positions, but definitely most of all, the cornerback spot. And I think it also comes down to where you feel like your strengths are in coaching. This is a coaching staff that has a lot of talented coaches or accomplished coaches on the defensive side of the ball, especially at linebacker and cornerback. And those just happen, and the whole defensive backfield, not just cornerback. And those are the two positions where the Jets are kind of going the youngest and most unproven right now, because they have guys like Jeff Ulbrich and Ricky Man. Well, at linebacker, they have Ulbrich and Robert Saleh. Then secondary, they've guys like Ricky Manning. Their secondary coach is also very good,
Tony
Oden. So they have a lot of successful coaches who have done really good work in the past at these positions. So they feel confident in their ability to take young, moldable guys with unlimited upside, because at this point, your upside is unlimited. If you haven't played yet, there's no telling how good you could be or how bad you could be. So there's a floor, but there's also a ceiling. So I think the Jets are confident in their ability to develop these guys at positions where they feel like they're the strongest in terms of their coaching abilities. So I think it makes sense for a team in this position. But at the same time, I think you can still explore at least bringing in a veteran, like a guy like Richard Sherman, who could help from a veteran leadership sort of standpoint. And then also it helps just to be competent, because that helps the rest of your roster develop. If your secondary is really struggling, it's kind of hard for your pass rush to have the time it needs to get quality reps in and make things happen and build confidence. So it does kind of work in that way as well. So I think it's something they should still explore and monitor if they feel like there is a feasible way to do it. But I think it can be justified for them to approach it the way they're approaching it right now.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where they're just going to have to see him every day in training camp and then through those preseason games, then reassess. Because it does sound like Nelson and Sherman should be on the market for the foreseeable future. I do think they'll get signed before the season, but maybe it will take a training camp injury or something like that for them to sign. I think if you listen to Robert Saleh talk, and you know he comes from Pete Carroll, who firmly believes in playing the young guys. That's how you develop them. I mean, Saleh went as far as to say that's the difference between player A and player B. I also think it comes down to faith in your coaching staff, like you said. I think the scheme is one that doesn't rely on amazing cornerback play. You just need competent corner play. I think they really like Bryce Hall. And I think, they have a bunch of athletic guys. They trust their coaching staff. And these guys like Bless Austin, who, have struggled probably more so last year, what he's good at kind of makes you believe that he could be good in this scheme. He does seem like he can play this cover 2 zone scheme. I think you're going to have to see him every single day in training camp. You never know how injuries will fall. At the end of the day, I do think they will add another body, whether it'll be Steven Nelson or Richard Sherman or somebody who gets cut in training camp. I don't think this is the final cornerback room. But I do believe Saleh when he says he's going to play the young guys. The other interesting quote he gave was about veteran quarterbacks. And he essentially said that, if you bring in a vet now, he just has to learn this, that doesn't have experience in the scheme. he has to learn the scheme just like your rookie quarterback does. So he kind of downplayed the significance of it. I think, again, that comes down to faith that they have in Rob Calabrese and Greg Knapp and Michael Floor to develop Zach Wilson and kind of mentor him. Michael, what are your thoughts on that? Are you comfortable with James Morgan if Zach Wilson were to go down?
Yeah, the quote that Salah gave is really interesting. He kind of totally, like you said, downplayed the impact of having a veteran quarterback, not in terms of on-field impact and winning games, but in terms of how they can help you develop your young quarterbacks. He completely downplayed it. He said, they could help with rehab and study habits, but he thinks that Wilson and both the other two guys, Morgan and Mike White, are already good enough in those areas to where they don't really need that sort of help. And then also, if that quarterback doesn't know the scheme, they're going to have to learn it as well, and they're not really bringing much in that area. So that's definitely an argument that I've kind of been on the side on, because we've seen it here in New York. The Jets have kind of done this every step of the way with veteran quarterbacks being in the building, whether it was Josh McCown. I guess Fitzpatrick counts, but they had when Mark Sanchez was here, they had Mark Brunell. So the Jets have done this a lot over the years, and a lot of teams in the league have. I don't think it necessarily always works. So I don't know if there's really proven track record of it working. So I agree with Salah on that front. But from a winning game standpoint, I think the Jets just have to really be honest in their self-evaluation with Morgan and Mike White. It's hard for us to tell without being at practice every single day, watching the film, knowing the scheme. But if they truly feel comfortable in one of those guys to come in and be about as competent as you could hope for in a backup quarterback, then by all means go with them. But if you're really not comfortable with them, then just grab a veteran, even if it's late in the offseason and there will be problems with, them getting acclimated to the scheme. And even if you don't think it helps the development too much, if you're really not comfortable with one of those two guys, I think you should definitely go ahead and try to find an upgrade at the backup spot. But, they're in practice every day. If they feel comfortable with one of these two guys, I think you can justify going with them as the backup. But I do agree with what Salah said in terms of the veteran not necessarily being too important from a development standpoint.
Yeah, it's exactly right that it's essentially how comfortable you're going to be. And when you mentioned some of those names in the past, I think Mark Brunell is maybe the only guy who helped any of those young guys, because Fitzpatrick took Gino's job, and then Josh McCown, I guess he was supposed to develop Christian Hackenberg. Sam Darnold too, I guess. So neither of those really worked out. I think that he has plenty of voices in his ear, as Adam Gase used to say, when it comes to Zach Wilson. I think Greg Knapp and Rob Calabrese in particular, the passing game specialist and the quarterback's coach, I think those, by all reports from around the league, are the types of guys you want when you have a young quarterback in the building. So I'm not really worried about having somebody to mentor Zach. It's more just having a competent backup QB. I mean, I will say, after seeing James Morgan's one-handed catch at George Fant's softball game, I feel a little better about his athleticism. But James Morgan is essentially a rookie. I mean, he'll be making his preseason debut right alongside Zach Wilson. So I think what this means is they're not going to trade a pick for Nick Foles, like some have suggested. I don't think they're as desperate. I think, like the cornerback room, they're going to give him as many reps as possible. They're going to go through training camp. And then you have to remember, with training camp cuts, there's going to be plenty of solid quarterbacks to hit the market. You look at a team like the Patriots, who have Cam Newton, Mac Jones, Brian Hoyer, and Jarrett Stidham. Well, obviously Mac Jones and Cam Newton are making the roster, but maybe Brian Hoyer shakes free, who we know the Jets had some interest in. There are plenty of teams like that around the league who have signed 3 to 4 quarterbacks, and somebody's going to shake free that you can sign to be your QB2 if you're really not comfortable with Morgan or White at the end of preseason. I think it's just a smart, way to build a team. They're not going to give out any money until they know exactly what the landscape is going to look like. I do think, like Joe Douglas has been 2 years ago, not necessarily as much last year, he was very active on those that training camp waiver wire just before the season. I do think you'll see the Jets make a few moves, 3 to 4 moves there to improve this team, because I think, especially at that quarterback and cornerback position, they may be happy with the group for now, but I don't think this is the group they're going to head into the season with. Speaking, I guess we brought up the George Fant softball charity game. Michael, what are you thinking about all this off-field camaraderie? They're all going to the Islanders games. I mean, Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh have been to Nets games and Knicks games. And This just seems like a different vibe. Is it just good PR from the Jets, or are you fully buying into that Robert Saleh has, or I guess in Joe Douglas's words, they're trying to build the best culture in all of sports?
I mean, I definitely think it's different enough to the point where it is meaningful. I think if it were just one or two things that kind of stood out, or particular events or little things that happen, tweets or whatever, then maybe it would be something that we'd be looking into a little bit too much. But at this point, we're so deep into the off season, and it's been so consistent with these guys doing stuff together off the field. You know, whether, like you mentioned, all the different games I've gone to, Wilson was holding some practices. He's going to be holding some practices in Utah. The
Rookies were
George
living
Fan
together
softball
too.
game, yeah, that as well. Players living together, so this is really different. Usually, for the most part, I think stuff like this might be read into a little bit too much. What goes on off the field, stuff that's on social media, things like that. But this is so different for this franchise in particular that it's definitely something that has an impact, because it just matches up with everything that, you know, we were sold with Robert Saleh coming in, that they're going to change this culture, that guys are going to want to play there, want to play for each other and be part of this team. And we're clearly seeing that in very obvious and clear ways. So I think it's definitely meaningful and is a very positive indication that Saleh and Joe Douglas are doing what they both were brought here to do, and that's build a very positive culture that's going to attract free agents to come here. It's going to make players want to stay, and it's just going to create a positive energy in the building that's going to help player development. It's going to help guys be motivated to play their best and give their best, play for each other, all that great stuff that the Jets were not doing the past couple of years. Because you look at the Adam Gase era, the past 2 years, and there was barely anything of this nature. Guys going to games together, holding practices a little bit, but not nearly as much. So I think it's definitely something positive.
I kind of disagree with that a little bit.
Okay.
Well, I agree with most of what you're saying. I mean, I think culture comes with winning. I think that's just what you look at, like New England. The culture they established there was because there was an expectation of winning there. And so everybody who came there knew the expectation, knew they were playing for the greatest coach of all time and the greatest quarterback of all time. And so they were going to work their tail off to make sure they weren't going to be the one to cost them a Super Bowl that year. So that's like their culture. And Seattle has a great culture. There's great cultures across the league, and the Jets have obviously been a bit of a wasteland the last 10 years. But I think you're right. Good chemistry, good camaraderie. Is this stuff going to override talent? I mean, Greg Williams used to say culture beats talent every day of the week. And I think, okay, maybe like we just mentioned, if you're a winning culture, that might be the case. If you have like a system, a pipeline of talent of young guys who can step in, next man up, that type of attitude, maybe. But this whole camaraderie and this energy, this stuff is great. But like Robert Saleh said in his press conference, you don't really know who this team is until adversity hits. And I think this will help when adversity hits. And it's nice from a fan perspective, but it's not going to ride the talent on the team. And I disagree with what you're saying about the Gase Jets, because I actually felt like they did have pretty good chemistry, maybe not on the field. And I think as things started to spiral out of control, maybe, but we were saying a lot of the same stuff last offseason. They went to go play, maybe it was 2 off seasons ago, they went to go play Top Golf. They seemed to get along on the field. I think it's definitely a more positive vibe, and I think that's mainly attributed to the head coach and the coaching staff as a whole. I think that has been a big boost. But as far as player relations, I don't think the Jets have had too many player altercations, I guess, since, you could go back to 2015 early Bulls era when they had the veterans and Geno Smith's getting punched in the face, and there's Muhammad Wilkerson and Sheldon Richardson. I think since that era, the Jets have been a pretty positive locker room. It's just been maybe from coaching, and the culture of winning hasn't necessarily been there. But look, the celebrity softball game and going to all these New York sporting events, that's fun. That's great. But as Saleh said, we're not really going to know who this team is until adversity strikes.
Yeah. And like, that's definitely true. You're not winning games off of Dan Feeney chugging beers at the Coliseum. But I think
You'd be undefeated.
they would definitely be undefeated if you won games that way, and the Patriots would never win a game. But
Ooh.
I think
They did have Tom Brady, who can like pound a beer in 2 seconds.
although we didn't really see him unleash that till he got to Tampa Bay. That's when
he did it. He did it on the Late Show when he was the Patriots quarterback. He said he could pound. He said he could chug a beer in 1 second, and credit to him, he did.
Okay, so him and Dan Feeney would lead the MVP race. But I think the biggest thing here is that this is a requisite thing. That's what I think it is. You're not going to win games based off of this, but you have to have this sort of culture just to be good. If you don't have this, then it's hard to win games at all. Be a consistently productive franchise if you don't have a culture like this in place. And I don't really think the Jets did have that. They weren't a mess the past couple years in terms of players in the locker room, and relations off the field and things like that. But they definitely weren't at this level. I don't think they were close to this. Like, and you mentioned the golf and some things like that, but I feel like that's,
The
it,
bowling.
it's okay, but it wasn't close to this level. And I think this is, again, you're not winning games based off of this. Winning games is what makes players want to come. It's what makes, it's what establishes the respect for your team. But this these kind of things is just solid proof. And the fact that they've done it so quickly within these first few months and within, a time in our history with COVID, although it is, coming out a little bit, still, it's, for them to be doing as much as they're doing is in this time, this quickly, early in their tenure with this team, rookies who have been here for a couple months, hanging out with veterans and all this is, I think it's a really promising thing.
Uh,
I totally
I
understand what
think
you're saying. I'm
I think
with
the
you.
biggest
You got to win games, but I think this is a different level of energy.
I think the biggest thing it points to is the character aspect of Joe Douglas when he's looking on building a team. He's mentioned it many times. And even last year when they had Gase, it still had a full Joe Douglas draft class. And even if you go back to 2019, Joe Douglas still was able to make some additions, although they weren't really meaningful additions. Um, I think that's what it comes back to is that the Jets have put an emphasis on bringing good characters into the locker room. I mean, you look at the coaching staff talk about Elijah Moore and the type of work ethic he has, and you listen to Keelan Cole talk, you listen to Corey Davis, and just there's been an emphasis on the guys they brought in, whether it's free agency or the draft, on bringing good character guys. And I think that is a big part of the culture, but the culture, like you said, is going to be established on the field if they can win some games. And I guess continuing with our talk about how the Jets can improve this team, our podcast last week, I think it was right after, it might have been the next day, came out that the Jets were the favorites for Morgan Moses. It seems like that, I don't want to say should get done, knock on wood, could get done. Seems like if they're the favorites, they're the favorites. It seems like the Jets should get it if they want it. What are your thoughts on this? I think there's, Damian Woody kind of disputed what you were saying earlier about trying to play him at guard. I do agree that he might be a better scheme fit there, and I think that Fant's a good scheme fit at tackle. But at the end of the day, Moses is still a better tackle than Fant, and tackle's arguably a more important position. What are your thoughts on the prospects of adding Moses specifically at right tackle?
Well, I think the idea of playing him at right guard would be the way I would want to do it. I think that would be the best way to maximize the talent of the entire unit if you just slid Moses in at right guard, kept Fant at right tackle. But I do understand that that's most likely not going to happen. Morgan Moses is in his prime. He probably has a pretty good amount of demand on the market. So he's not going to move to a position where his earnings are going to be limited when he's only 30 years old and he hasn't missed a start in 7 years. So I understand that that's definitely not going to happen. If they sign him, they're going to be playing him at right tackle. But, and actually, before I get into the concern, let's talk about the positive of this. This is definitely something I would do. They should do just because of the depth aspect of it. Even if you do put Moses at right tackle, bench Fant, and maybe there isn't much of an upgrade, Fant is a massive upgrade over Chuma Edoga and Connor McDermott as your backup swing tackle. So it definitely improves the depth significantly just by bringing him in. But I do wonder how much of an upgrade he would be over Fant at right tackle in this scheme, because he's not as good of a lateral mover and athlete as George Fant is. I really think Fant could have a great season as a run blocker in this offense. The things he does well fit very well in this scheme. While Moses, watching him, some of his highest grade games as a run blocker, he's more of a power guy working vertically, linebackers, down blocking, pinning defensive tackles inside, stuff that won't be as common in an outside zone offense. And also another thing with Moses is that he had a great season this year in terms of his PFF grade that has fans really high on him. But before the season, the last 4 years, he was pretty consistently average to below average. So this was a little bit of an outlier. It could be a sign of things to come. It could just prove to be just that, an outlier, something that he can't match. But in pass protection, he's not great. He's never been great. He's been average to below average in that area pretty much every season. His penalty numbers have been pretty high, other than last year. It was just his run blocking this past season that really pushed him up the list as a standout guy in terms of grading. And he was doing that in a scheme that is a lot different than what the Jets are going to be running this year. So I wonder about the scheme fit. I wonder about his random breakout after being pretty average for the most part for a few years. And at the end of the day, Washington did cut him. So you have to think about that as well. So it's definitely a move that I would be a fan of just for the sake of improving the depth. And even in this scheme, I feel like he can match Fant probably. I don't think he'll be worse, but I do wonder if he would be an upgrade over Fant at right tackle in this offense.
I think it's good to be skeptical for sure. I purely based on the fact that Connor McDermott won't be tasked with protecting Zach Wilson's blind side if Beckham were to go down. Makes me want to do this deal. I mean, maybe they could slide Fant over to the left tackle or whatnot, but just improving the depth, specifically in the offensive line, to keep your franchise centerpiece healthy and intact and upright. I think that's worth the money that they're going to have to spend to get him. I mean, what would you spend? I think we talked about this last week, but now that you're the Jets are the front runners, what do you think a contract for Morgan Moses could be? It's a multi-year, which I found a little surprising. I thought it might be a one-year deal for Moses. What do you think a multi-year Morgan Moses Jets contract could look like?
Yeah, I'll be honest. Because of the concerns I laid out, I don't think I would be a fan of a multi-year deal. I don't think he's good enough to where I'd want to be locked into that for multiple years. So I don't know if I'd be big on that unless it, was the type of deal that's structured well to where they could get out of it if it doesn't go as they hope. But in terms of a one-year deal, I would pay up to get him in for 1 year. They have cap space. You might as well use it and price out some of the other competitors, such as the Bears, who have much less cap space than the Jets do right now. So 1 year, I would go up to $8 million. I'd feel okay with that. But multi-year is something that, just based on the body work that he has right now and the scheme fit, I don't think that is something I'd be too comfortable with unless it was a team-friendly deal in terms of the guarantees that they could get out after next year.
And I wonder how much Fant's contract will play into the negotiations with Moses, because if Moses is signing to be the right tackle, is he really going to accept that his backup's going to be making more than him? And Douglas can't even pin that on the last GM or something like that, because Douglas signed Fant's contract. Mm-hmm. Douglas gave Fant that deal. So it would be kind of hard for him to say, well, Fant may have been worth that money back in March of 2020, but we don't think you are, Morgan. I think Morgan's like, well, if I'm going to start, I want to make more than Fant. Now, granted, we don't know how the rest of Morgan Moses' landscape looks. We know Joe Douglas has proven to be pretty stingy and good at understanding the landscape, whether it be the draft or free agency and getting the best value. So maybe he can lowball him a little bit there, but I do wonder how much that'll play into Morgan Moses' negotiating power. It just kind of comes down to how much the Jets want him. But I do think that they can outbid every other team, even if Moses' next best offers from the Bears for $5 million and the Jets offer him $7 million, that's still less than Fant, but $2 million more than the Bears. So you could still see the Jets getting that done. I agree with you. I'm a little surprised it'd be a multi-year deal just because he is 30. I'm not necessarily sure about the scheme fit. But hey, maybe there's a plan to move McGar. That kind of does make me think that they think he could have some positional versatility. So we'll see on that.
And on the fan point, I'm curious what you think, because, if they do sign it, Moses, play him at right tackle, and Fant becomes your backup, although I like him in that role, right now he's supposed to have a cap hit of $9.8 million, which is, I think, sixth highest among right tackles, which is a lot for a backup. So do you think they would maybe try for a restructure, a trade? He has more leverage than Crowder did because he has $4.5 million guaranteed already. If they cut him right now, they'd be on the hook for $6.5 million in dead money, which would be $5.5 million this year, $1 million next year spread out. So he has more leverage than Crowder. It's not the same situation to where the Jets can pretty much force him into taking it. But what do you think? Do you think they'd maybe explore
No,
something with
no.
Fant?
Well, if Fant's agent is worth anything, he won't allow that to happen. I mean, look, I guess it depends how hardball the Jets want to play it, but I think a big reason you bring Morgan Moses in is for the depth, and you lose that if you cut Fant. And like you said, if the Jets are going to cut Fant, they probably should have done it at the beginning of the league year, where they wouldn't have been on the hook for that $4.5 million, like you mentioned. So I don't think so. I think even a restructure at this point, it's like,
Yeah, I'm talking more restructure, and it would be hard because of the terms, but I don't think they'd cut him definitely. But
I think cut is out
restructure
of.
maybe.
I think Fant's agent could call that bluff. I think in an ideal world, you'd say, yeah, look, I mean, we'll pay you more than the $6.5 million that we'd lose for cutting you, but maybe we can cut your contract down to 6 million, 7 million. I don't know, something like that. If they could maybe try to shave off a couple million, but Fant was a team captain last year. I think he can call the bluff on that too. I think if he doesn't do it, I don't think the Jets are going to cut him, and I don't think anybody's going to line up at the door for trading it. So the Jets may lose that one a little bit. Maybe they're definitely going to be overpaying George Fant, especially if he's in that backup role. But I just don't think, unless George Fant's agent really falls for the idea that the Jets could cut him, and they want to save a few $1,000,000 there. But other than that, I don't think there's any hope for a restructure. I think,
and because of these terms, I would keep an eye on him at guard. I don't think it will happen, but I would think about it just for the fact that, do you really want to pay a backup this much money when you could play him at his natural position and move Moses inside where he projects well? I think it's possible.
I think what it does.
I don't think it will happen, though.
I think Moses could play guard. I think they may try to look. I don't know. I don't think it's for certain one way or another. I think the Jets kind of look at this like, let's get him in the building. He can play right tackle, and then you improve your depth at tackle with Fant being able to be your swing tackle. He can come in for Becton if he goes down, or come in for Moses if he goes down. You also, if you want, you could try Moses out first at right guard, put him in that right guard competition, see how he looks, see how Fant looks. And then if a tackle were to go down, then Moses bumps back out to tackle. It just kind of comes down to how comfortable Moses is with the positional versatility. Damon Woody knows a hell of a lot more about O-line play than me, but I think he's maybe jumping the gun a little bit to say for certain that the Jets won't play Moses at right guard, because like you said, schematically, it makes more sense. Financially, it makes more sense for the Jets. I just don't think it's something they're going to rule out. I agree that I think Moses probably wouldn't sign here unless it was to play tackle. But then again, if he's getting a multi-year deal, maybe it doesn't matter. And then he also shows that he has positional versatility. I don't know. It's something to monitor for sure. I do think the Jets get this done, because even if he's playing tackle, it brings, something positive to your team.
Yeah, I think what Damian was going for is not necessarily the scheme part of it, but just more that from Moses's perspective, I don't think he would want to sign to move into guard, just because he doesn't necessarily need to move to a position where he's going to have less potential in terms of earnings going forward than if he just stays right where he's at, which he probably feels he deserves to stay at. Moses does, because he's played pretty well and he's been consistent. So I think that's more what they're going for. And for that reason, I don't think it will happen. But to me, I think that would be the best way to do it, because I like Fant at right tackle. I think Moses is a powerful, strongly built guy who, even though his athleticism isn't great, as good as Fant, I'd prefer Fant on the edge. I think at guard, then I think his athleticism would be sufficient for this scheme. And also in pass protection, I think he does better with power sort of moves, bigger rushers than he does with speed around the edge, and he can project well in that phase to guard as well. So that's how I would do it. I don't think it will happen, but this is going to be really interesting to watch play out. But I do think it's a positive for sure if it does happen, no matter how they disperse everything.
Well, Michael, before we get out of here, one last topic. The Jets have officially wrapped all their spring workouts. It's just training camp, 5 weeks away. Who do you think improved their stock the most the last couple weeks, months? And who do you think's stock dropped the most the last couple weeks or months?
Well, the first guy comes to mind is obviously Elijah Moore. I think that's a low-hanging fruit answer, because I feel like he's stood out enough to where and he'll have to keep it going through training camp, but he stood out enough to where he's going to be a fixture right away. I don't think there's going to be that transition period as long as he continues to play how he did in training camp. In terms of followers, I would stay at the wide receiver position and look at Mims a little bit. I don't think it's necessarily too much to look in yet that he was playing second team because he missed some time, and that's how this coaching staff is operating. You miss some time, you got to work your way back in, and it's really early in the offseason. They're just trying everything out. So I don't think he's necessarily a true second teamer in their eyes right now, but he did miss some time. Barrios played great. Moore played great. Crowder is back. So there are a few things going against him right now. So just in the sense that he didn't stand out as much as everyone did. So I think he'll have a little bit more to prove going to training camp than we thought he might have to prove coming into this offseason. But all is not even close to loss for him. Just not a great, not necessarily because of his own performance, just because of him missing time and other guys the position playing really well while he was out. And then on the same token, Bless Austin on the other side. He missed a little bit of time, and then Jason Pinnock got in there for some first team reps, and he was playing pretty well. So same thing with both of those guys, just not being on the field and having some other players, especially young, similarly young in the case of Mims, young players coming in and playing well in their absence.
Yeah, there's definitely a few guys. I think the first guy that jumps into my eyes as stock risen is CJ Mosley, and we'll see if that's warranted. I think coming into the offseason, I wasn't really expecting much at all from Mosley. Maybe that was a little misguided, but it's just, okay, 2 years off. We don't really know how committed he is. We don't know how healthy he is too, I guess, with the groin and core injury. But I will say, I mean, he's been at these workouts. He's looked good on the field. He seems to be back in his CJ Mosley ways to be, he's leading the team. He seems happy. I mean, how couldn't he be? He's literally playing for one of the better linebacker coaches in the league and who's now a head coach in Robert Saleh. So in my eyes, I think CJ Mosley improved his stock the most. Outside of CJ, I think, I guess I'll go stock down next. Another guy, and this isn't necessarily as much workouts as far as it is the whole offseason, is Ashton Davis, who I think coming into the offseason, I kind of figured might be the starter opposite May. I kind of liked his skill set in this scheme. But instead, he became kind of the third safety again. He seems like Joyner is going to be that starting safety opposite May. And it seems like Davis, whether it's because the injuries that he's dealing with right now, is kind of falling behind Joyner in that position group right there. I apologize. My dog is whimpering in the background. He just wants to leave the room. He doesn't want to hear any more of this Ashton Davis slander.
I guess watching highlights of last year's team.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But actually, those don't exist. He's just watching film of last year's team. There's no highlights.
Yeah, there's no highlights. But also, before we get out of here, I think the running back position is important to look at. If you believe the OTA and minicamp hype, I know, Bowie, you don't like what I'm about to say next, but I think Tevin Coleman's stock may have dropped a little bit, just as far as he came into day one of OTAs as the starting running back, and he seems to have yielded that to Michael Carter and Ty Johnson. I think Coleman's still going to obviously have a role in the passing game, but I think there was a chance that, especially before drafting Michael Carter, that he could be getting a big sum of the reps, and I think he's more going to be regulated to that third down passing specialist, which I think is perfect for him. But it seems like Michael Carter's stock has risen, that the Jets are going to be playing a lot of rookies. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, for better or for worse, the Jets are going to be playing a lot of rookies. And I think long-term, like you said, if you're in this position like the Jets are, it's a smart thing because those guys are all going to develop. They're going to get a ton of reps. And then when you're hopefully trying to compete in 2022, you have a bunch of veterans, young veterans on rookie deals. But when you look at, Zach Wilson's obviously going to start. Elijah Vera Tucker's obviously going to start. Like you said, Elijah Moore at the beginning of the offseason, I think he's definitely the biggest stock riser. It was kind of thought, well, your starting receiver is going to be Corey Davis, Denzel Mims, and Jamison Crowder. And then with Moore, you can have him return punts. He can be kind of your gadget guy and then work him in to replace Crowder. Now it's like, look, he's a completely different player than Crowder. He's going to have his own role. And he may be wide receiver number 2 in this offense. And by a lot of reports, he's been the best player on the entire field. I mean, granted, Marcus May wasn't out there. Carl Lawson wasn't out there for a lot of it. Quentin Williams isn't there. But Elijah Moore, by reports, was their best player in all their workouts. So he's probably going to be, I don't know if I'm going to say starting, but Yeah, hell, I'll say starting. I think he's going to play the majority of the snaps. I think Michael Carter's probably going to start. Then you look at the defensive side. It seems like Michael Carter, the second, is their plan for the slot corner. One of those outside linebackers between Jamie and Sherwood and Hamza Nasruddin is probably going to start at linebacker. And hell, like you said, maybe Jason Pinnock gets in at the outside corner from Bless Austin. So the Jets could have 7 rookies starting, which would probably be unheard of. So I guess from a fan perspective, this is exciting. Gets to watch a lot of young guys develop, but I also leads me to believe that at the beginning of the season might be some lumps taken. So stock up, stock down. I think it kind of is the rookies for me would be the biggest stock up. I think those guys are going to get a lot of reps. And then some of the vets, some of those guys from that 2019 draft class, you mentioned Mims, I mentioned Ashton Davis, Michael Piron's another one. Those are the guys that I think are have suffered the most from this offseason.
I would throw in a couple more stock up and stock down that came to mind. Josh Adams at running back, I feel like seems like his stock is down, that he hasn't really gotten nearly as many first team opportunities as the rest of the guys. I like me some Josh Adams, not looking great right now, but we'll see what happens in training camp. I'm going to say Bryce Hall is a winner. I know he's been victimized on some highlights, but I think that's what I like the most, because the reason these catches, most of them against Elijah Moore, are highlights is because the coverage is so good that he's making Elijah Moore make ridiculous catches, and he's making Zach Wilson make ridiculous throws. So I think Bryce Hall, we've seen a good amount of him on video compared to the rest of the team, and he's looked pretty good. And based on the reports from Robbie training camp, he's been playing well. And he's also come in, he's a guy who came into this offseason who had question marks regarding, it wasn't completely certain that he would start. You figured he would, but it wasn't completely certain after only a handful of starts as a 5th round pick. But he's been pretty much had a stranglehold on the first team reps so far. So it seems like he's locked into that starting spot for now and has been doing pretty good against Elijah Moore, who's been awesome. So those are a couple that come to mind.
Yeah, I've got another stock down, actually. And I think this kind of started with the coaching change, and then throughout OTAs, I haven't heard his name once. And granted, there's no pad, so it's kind of hard for the guys in the trenches to make a name for himself, especially guys like this. But Lorenzo Fatukasi, I don't think he's even in the starting lineup. I mean, from what we've read, I mean, he isn't a perfect fit in Robert Saleh's prototypical 4-3 defense. I think he's definitely going to have a role as that run stuff for that goal line player. But I think you're going to see Fatukasi's share of the reps diminish significantly in favor of those more nimble interior defensive linemen like John Frankenmeyers, like Sheldon Rankins. They could slide their
John Marshall could be a guy who has a chance to take some of those reps.
Maybe John Marshall, but he hasn't even played, so I'm not even going to throw him in there. But right. Vinny Curry, hell, Jabari Zuniga, who had a sack. How great would it be if Zuniga could contribute literally anything after doing nothing last year? He's a guy to keep an eye out for because nobody's talking about him. So Fatukasi is a guy that I don't think he's going to be on the team next year. I just don't think the Jets are going to pay him because he's not necessarily a scheme fit. He's a great player. I think he'll make some plays this year in his situational role, but I think I think Fatukasi can go elsewhere, be a starter, and get paid some starter money. So I think his stock has dropped, but not necessarily from OTAs, just kind of from the hiring of Robert Saleh. So I guess throughout the whole offseason, those are the guys whose stock has risen and fallen the most.
I have one more up and down at one position. In the slot, Michael Carter 2. Michael Carter II has been playing. Michael Carter 2. Let's just call him that. MC2. MC2 has been playing pretty well, apparently, based on the reports. And Javelin Guidry, a guy who I really like, kind of seems like he was falling off in that competition a little bit against MC Squared. So this is going to be a very interesting one to watch. MC Squared is one of my favorite guys out of this class. And Javelin Guidry, I loved what he did in the 3 games he played, pretty extended action last season. He was really solid. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch. But it looks like MC Squared is he's kind of got a little bit of an edge, as much as you can. But going to training camp, I think that'll be a tight one.
It's such a coach's cliche, but there really is competition at literally every single position. You look at quarterback, the backup quarterback, competition, I guess, between James Morgan and Mike White. They're also, I guess, competing against a phantom free agent they could sign. If they impress, they're not going to sign a free agent. If they don't, they are. You look at running back, it's going to be, well, who's going to be the lead back? Who's going to get the majority of the carries? Obviously, it's going to be a running back by committee approach, but, who's going to separate themselves? And then you have Michael Piran versus Josh Adams for that last roster spot. You look at the offensive line, there's a battle at right guard between Greg Van Roten, Cameron Clark, Alex Lewis, hell, maybe Morgan Moses. Though if he gets signed, there's no competition there, I guess. Tight end, it seems like Herndon is the presumed starter, but the last few days he was running with the twos. It seems like Tyler Kroft, maybe even, well, I think Wesco's probably going to be more the fullback, but it seems like Tyler Kroft, maybe Ryan Griffin could overtake him there. You look at receiver, we didn't think there was going to be much competition, but it seems like there's a Keelan Cole, Denzel Mims, Elijah Moore kind of competition for who can be the number 2 opposite Corey Davis. And then you go to the defensive line, there's a competition on who's going to be the edge outside of Carl Lawson. There's Vinny Curry. Do you play John Franklin Myers out there? Or would you rather have him inside? There's Jabari Zuniga. There's Bryce Huff. Then you go to the linebacker spot. The weak linebacker spot is really the only one that's up for grabs between Jamie Sherwood and Hamza Nasruddin. Like you mentioned with the corners, Saleh wouldn't even go as far to say that Bryce Hall has cemented himself as a starter. He said they're all up for grabs, 1, 2, and 3. I think it's safe to assume Hall is going to be starting at one of them, but there's competition at 2 and 3. And then hell at safety, it seems like Joyner, given the success he's had at free safety and May's versatility at strong safety, it seems like Davis is the odd man out there. I think he's a great special teamer, third safety. I was hoping to see him maybe take a leap into a starting position, but there's a bit of a competition there. And then you can look at the kicker. Special teams, there's definitely competition there. So I think there's competition all across the board, which is only going to be good when you're talking about building a culture and getting these young guys reps. It's exciting. And I think that's part of the reason they're not necessarily racing to sign any vets is some of them are going to hit the market at the end of training camp. You can pick them up there. Right now, let the young guys battle it out and kind of let the best man win. I like the strategy heading into training camp. We'll be back on Thursday with another special episode, probably another positional preview. Michael and I have to talk about that this week. Figure out what we're going to be doing, but we will be sticking with the 2-episode model. We have some special guests coming up in a few weeks, but we'll continue with the regular Monday podcast topics, some mailbags. On Thursday, as we mentioned, could be positional breakdowns, player profiles, interviews, whatnot. So keep a lookout for them Monday and Thursday. Cool Your Jets episodes. You can follow us at CUIJ Pod on Twitter. Myself, Ben W. Blessington, Michael at Michael_Nania. Go to jetsxfactor.com for the best Jets content in the world. And if you'd be so kind to leave us a rating or a review or subscribe to us on iTunes, that's very much appreciated. Michael, any last words?
So what's our official nickname for Michael Carter II? Are we going MC squared? Okay.
We the MC2?
MC2, the sequel to Michael Carter.
MC squared is funnier. Well, MC squared is an actual, thing. MC2 doesn't sound scientific or mathematical at all. I mean, it just sounds pretty lame. It's almost as bad as your all gas, no break ending.
I think it's annoying that Michael Carter, the running back, got 32 and MC squared got number 30. Why can't they just give him the 2?
Oh, I see. So you wanted Michael Carter, the running back, to have 30 and then Michael Carter, the second, to be 32. You're a weirdo. I guess that's what makes you so good.
This culture isn't as good as we thought.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, I guess I was going to say Happy Father's Day. We're recording this on Father's Day, but everybody have a great week. We'll be back on Thursday.
Pass to work quickly. Down to 6 seconds. Carr going down again. And it's Quentin Williams this time for the Jets.
For the middle in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown. The punter to beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown, most likely.
Looks right. Fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel Mims.